Hello, hello, and welcome again to a Beatles program, a weekly talk show that we call Things We Said Today. This is a program in which we talk about anything and everything that has to do with the Beatles, any part of their past, the present, the future, whatever we feel like talking about in the show. I'm Ken Michaels, one of the regular co-hosts of the show, also known for my syndicated Beatles program called Every Little Thing, being joined by my three regulars. First of all, we have the contributing writer for Billboard.com and also Access.com. And he's also the author of Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones. And that is Steve Marinucci. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
Also in the group, we have the executive editor of Beatle Fan magazine, and he's also the author of Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation. And that's our very own Al Sussman. Hi, Al.
Hi, Ken. Hello there, everybody.
And also we have an author of several Beatle books. He's authored From the Cavern to the Rooftop, and recently the ebook called Got That Something, How I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything. And he's also a contributing writer for Beatle Fan in various publications, and that's Alan Cozen. Hi, Alan.
Hello, Ken. Hello, everyone.
And once again, we have our special guest who's been turning up frequently, we're very happy to say. She is the author of several books, including Songs We Were Singing, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser-Known Tracks, and more recently, Michael Jackson FAQ. And also a contributing writer to Beatle Fan, and that being our own Kit O'Toole. Hi, Kit.
Hi, Ken. Hi, everybody. Great to be back with you guys.
Before we get to our regular topic for the show, we're going to run down a few news items of what we found out in the past week or so, one of which concerns something that's going to be done for George Harrison's birthday coming up, and that is a vinyl box set. It's all of George's studio albums from Wonderwall Music all the way through Brainwashed, and it even includes the double live album of Live in Japan, and they're also throwing in a couple of 12-inch vinyl discs for Got My Mind Set on You and When You Was Fab. And that's coming out on February the 24th in a box set. And the titles are all available individually as well. Notice, by the way, that the concert for Bangladesh is not included in there.
That's right.
But any comments about this, guys?
Well, the not including Bangladesh is a little frustrating in that it's the only thing that's not included, unless you count the greatest hits albums, some of which have some tracks on them that you kind of need to collect. But
Bangladesh.
Yeah, right. I mean, for starters.
And they also didn't
Cheer Down.
And the outtakes, the
Early takes.
The early takes album is not included.
Oh, well, that's
either.
true too. Yeah. Yeah. You know.
Alan's voice is getting more frustrated by the minute.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We got some emails saying we're not allowed to criticize the Harrison estate. So, what can I say? But
That's true.
No, this was just for me, listener who takes it amiss, and I want to address that slightly. I mean, we're not trashing Olivia and Danny. Okay, we're just saying. Basically, we're just responding to the releases or non-releases, and the writer felt that, they're doing what George wanted done. Well, I don't know. I don't know that she knows that any better than we do, but they put out volume 1 of First Takes, or whatever they called it. Early takes, and they said volume 1, and that implies volume 2 is coming. And if she's correct that they're doing what George wanted, then George wanted them to put out, some archival stuff. And I have a hard time believing that he said, "I want you to put out archival stuff, but put it out so slowly that all the people who would buy this will sort of die off before the whole set comes out." Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe, but anyway, that's just my response. So, but yeah, it's great that they're putting out the box set. I think it'll be well done. I think it'll be lovely. I like the idea that you can also order, if you've gotten rid of your turntable and you want to get one to go with this box set and some of the others that have come out in recent years. There's a nicely designed George Harrison turntable.
They go with the Beatles turntable that was
Yeah, and there is the new version of I Me Mine, which was when the Harrison estate announced this, they announced them all together, the expanded I Me Mine, the turntable, and the releases. It's just slightly frustrating that there are these couple of things that aren't included, and you just sort of wish they were. That's all.
Although, if I remember correctly, the concert for Bangladesh also was not included in the Apple years, the CD box set.
Yeah, I mean, it may be sort of an accounting issue, because that's still,
so,
I believe, a charity kind of thing. But you could take care of the accounting issues internally. It's like, okay, what the receipts are for this part of this, X percent actually accounts for Bangladesh, and therefore that should go to wherever it's supposed to go, and but still include it. I don't know.
Do you think it has as a rights thing because of all the individual performers? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
Well, I guess that's possible too, but they are able to reissue it separately.
But you would think that would have been taken care of.
Before the last CD came out.
Right. Or even before that, when the vinyl came out. I mean, that would have been, you would have thought, part of the deal. But who knows where we are at this point in time. This far down the road. I don't.
Right. Maybe Alan Klein knows.
Yeah, maybe he does.
Somewhere out there on the other side.
Should we ask him?
Right.
And actually, you just reminded me of something, which is, what about the concert for George?
Oh.
Well,
where does that fall under? That's not technically a George Harrison album, although it's a tribute to George. Yeah. So I guess that wouldn't count as part of it.
I wouldn't. No.
I think I think we're counting just the things that he's on and did, and But,
right.
Well, if anything, I think this proves that there's enough of a demand in vinyl these days to warrant doing something like this. I mean, there was the John Lennon vinyl box set that came out as well.
Right.
So, it's just nice that they're addressing this. And I do know that Danny has said that he's a big vinyl fan. So that could be part of the reason why. But, we could argue back and forth, as we have many times on this show, what should come out. Will it ever come out? What they should do, what they shouldn't do, on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is that the Beatles, group and solo, have a certain amount of standards that they set, and they want what they feel is the best quality that they can deliver. And Danny was actually there was a quote from Danny, it was probably about a year ago, where he was kind of upset that people were complaining to him, what's taking so long. And I think that his response was that he's got to comb through the archives and pick what he feels his father would be proud of, what he would approve, at least what Danny thinks his father would approve. And who's to question Danny or Olivia? Who knew George better than them?
Well, at least the CD and the DVD are still apparently in print, so that's a good thing, that you can still buy them.
You mean Bangladesh?
Yes. Yes. At least that's the case. Although the special version has gone up a little bit in price, but the regular version is still available. So at least they're, like I say, at least they're still available. So.
Okay. And another news item, and this is a big one, is that Paul McCartney is suing Sony, or Sony ATV, for the publishing rights to the Beatles catalog, which I thought I heard this every few years. You hear about this.
Right.
So what's the difference now? Can anyone explain that? I know, Alan, you've done a lot of reading on this, and you, Steve?
Well, the difference is that he's actually filed the lawsuit. There's been a lot of stories that he wanted the rights back. I mean, there were all these rumors that he was hoping to get his rights back, and people were speculating what he might do or whether he was going to do anything, but he has finally done it. And
well, I think he couldn't get his rights back until 2018. This is what they're talking about, and he hinted at that a little bit a few years ago. He was, when they were talking again about is he going to try and buy the ATV catalog back, he said something like, well, at a certain point I kind of won't have to, and no one knew exactly what he meant. But it turns out when you read the 16 pages of the lawsuit, talks about termination rights, which he gets at a certain point, and that point is 2018. And the reason he filed the suit now, from what I gather from reading the suit, is that there was a case recently with Duran Duran, where an English court ruled that, there are termination rights, but in England we don't necessarily have to go by what the American copyright law termination rights are. The contracts between the label and the artist are paramount from the British point of view. And as we know from last week's episode, British law is very, very different than American law. And
I
loved
Paul, your explanation last week. That was wonderful. To anybody, if you guys, people out there, if you didn't hear Alan talking about British law last week, go back and listen to that show.
So I think he's filing it now because this is coming up in 2018, which is like a year away, and he's looking at the Duran Duran lawsuit. He's looking at Sony possibly saying, well, we're going to go with that holding, and he just wants to know that in 2018, when he wants to exercise his termination rights, he'll be able to. It's kind of a preemptive thing. It's like, I don't want to wait until 2018 and then have to file suit, and then the suit goes on for 3 years. I want to know now, or am I going to get my rights back? And, apparently, according to the 1976 copyright law, he has that right. And he's just asserting it now, which kind of makes sense. He's being proactive.
And Sony, in response, said that the suit was filed prematurely, which I thought was an interesting comment, which kind of, I don't know if that means that they had planned on, talking with him at some point or something. I don't know, but that was an interesting development, their reaction to this whole thing.
Yeah, maybe it is. And basically, if I were Paul McCartney and or Eastman, I would be saying, okay, well, the response we wanted to hear was, well, of course you can have your termination rights in 2018. All they said was, well, it's a little too early. So, I think that basically by saying that as their response, they basically vindicated his reason to file the suit.
Yeah, right. It was interesting, by the way, the first thing I noticed, for people who have not seen the suit, look up the Hollywood Reporter version of the story. It is attached to their story. 16 pages you can download for free. But I thought the first thing that was interesting was in the upper right-hand corner, it said Eastman and Eastman. I'm going, whoa, look at that. They're still attached to McCartney. That's pretty interesting.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, John Eastman and Lee Eastman. Their names are there in black and white. So they're representing Paul, and others too. Looks like he's got a whole bunch of lawyers, but they're the ones representing Paul. The other thing that was interesting, somebody I know on Facebook said noticed it too. He's asking for a jury trial. Can you imagine how many people are going to hope to get onto that jury?
Yeah,
I'm raising my hand right now. I'm volunteering.
Yeah, really, I'll serve.
You and about 3 million other people.
Right. But it's in New York, and so for once, I'm not in the New York jury pool when I can.
Exactly.
Darn.
I'll go in your place, Alan.
Yeah.
But just to be clear about this only pertains to the U.S. copyright, the publishing rights in the U.S., correct?
Right.
Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, doesn't this have to do with the fact that after a certain amount of time, and I think it's 56 years, that the songwriting, the publishing rights go back to the songwriters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So is this going to be a gradual thing where, say, in 2018, Paul gets just the 1962 songs, and then in 2019 he gets the 1963 songs, or does he get all of them all at once?
That's a good question. I don't know. It also should be, and Alan, you can confirm this, we're not talking about all of the songs. There are several songs that are not included in this lawsuit.
Right, only
So
the
it's
stuff that
not-
was in ATV, so...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
Let Me Do and P.S. I Love You are not in there, I think.
Right, but he already owns those, so...
That's right. That's why he did P.S. Let Me Do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
And also, how does this... Where does Yoko fit in?
Yeah.
She made apparently a separate agreement with Sony about the treatment of John's part of the catalog. So this is just to do with Paul's part of the catalog.
right.
It's not really a part of the catalog in the sense of which songs John wrote and which songs Paul wrote. I mean, they're all Lennon and McCartney songs for publishing purposes, but Sony would be paying her a royalty and they would be paying McCartney a royalty, and she's made a deal to do with how her part of that royalty is administered, and so this is just to do with Paul's side of it.
Okay.
And it's funny if she had filed suit first and he had not, how many people would have looked at her motives? I bet you that would have happened, but but of course it has not happened with Paul, and it shouldn't with either one of them, because according to the law they're looking out for their individual rights, and that's what they have a right to do.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying there would have been that speculation, especially in social media, about what she had done. I have one other news item when we get through that we didn't mention before when we were talking up.
I think I was just going to bring up probably the same thing. Speaking of Yoko, right?
Yes,
Okay.
you are indeed correct, sir.
Right.
So,
for people who may not be aware of this, on Saturday there were any number of giant rallies around the country, women's rights rallies, and one of them was in New York, and in fact Yoko was photographed at the New York rally, and she was in a wheelchair. It's been known for some months that she's 84 years old.
Yeah.
And she's obviously has a tough time getting around now. I think that's why she wasn't really seen very much at the, for instance, the 8 Days a Week premiere, and she didn't come on stage at the Love anniversary show, etc.
no, but she was there, and in fact.
Right, but she didn't come up on stage.
No, but when she did come down the red carpet, she had somebody. She was on the arm of somebody.
Yeah.
And she was walking extremely slowly, and and she walked right by me, and I kind of noticed that. I mean, and she had been sick with last January.
Yeah.
I think she got the flu. I think it was the flu. I didn't look it up, but I believe it was the flu. And she was down for several days. And, anybody that has an elderly parent knows that whether she had a flu or pneumonia, I can't remember, but that kind of a serious illness on somebody that age can be very devastating and sometimes fatal. And and she was really lucky to come out of that. And apparently that, this is, it's an ongoing recovery thing for her. And it's good that I'm glad she was out there, but, and as Al pointed out to me on social media, the fact of her standing up through that whole march would have been very tough on her, and that is very, very true. That is very true.
But it's also, it's also kind of worth noting that, if she was in a wheelchair, she went, and it obviously meant a lot to her because she could very easily have just stayed home and said, you know what, I don't want to go out in a wheelchair. I don't want to go out in the cold. All kinds of reasons. This obviously was important to her. So
right,
absolutely.
Right.
I gave her a tremendous amount of credit for being there and braving. I mean, those were some tough, big crowds and
huge.
And I mean, I gave her a tremendous amount of credit.
Yeah. I'm just so happy that she participated because she's one of the biggest champions ever when it comes to women's rights.
Absolutely.
And she was there at the forefront early on.
She sure was.
So just really happy that she was a part of it.
And John would have been there too, despite the fact there are people who have said that John got conservative in his old age. I really kind of doubt. I really think he would have been there.
I agree.
He didn't really have an old age, actually.
No.
Well,
and he was so chameleon-like and so changeable that it's impossible to speculate what a 76-year-old John Lennon would be like.
I think in this case, it actually is possible to speculate.
Right?
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
There's so many times when John and Yoko are on the same page with everything. It's hard to imagine John not feeling something for this movement and for what's going on right now in the country.
Yep.
And how the whole world's responding to it, not just the U.S. So
absolutely.
It's times like these, and also when 9/11 happened, when I miss John the most. Because I'd love to hear what his thoughts about what's going on in the world, politically and socially. So
right.
Very true.
Yeah. So let's move on to our main topic, which is, and this is actually one that was Kit's idea. And as soon as she presented it to me, I said, that's a great idea. So let's go with it. And it happens to be turning points in the Beatles' careers, I guess mainly as a group. And I'm sure that she was probably thinking more musical than anything else, although I know Steve has other things he wants to bring up in this particular category. Maybe you might just want to explain what you meant by turning points and give a few examples yourself, Kit.
Sure. Well, I first came up with this idea from a conversation I had a while back with a good friend of mine who is a first-generation fan. And I asked her, I said, I've always been curious what the reaction was when Strawberry Fields Forever was first released, because that was such a turning point, and not that I think, that their fans were necessarily thinking that at the time, but it's something that when you hear it, you just immediately think, wow, that is entirely different, from what they've done before. I mean, it was an indicator that they were going in another direction, and that really got me to thinking about, even before Strawberry Fields Forever, what were moments, and, I was mainly thinking about music, but you can definitely expand this to other things as well. What was the moment where, when, you heard something or you saw something, they did, where you thought, this is something that is new, that they haven't done before, and is an indicator of a new direction that they were going in. And, what is it about that song, about that event, whatever it is, that made you think they are moving on to a new era, a new phase, a new direction? So that's what I was thinking about. And so, and I'll tell you, I don't know if you guys found this was a lot harder to narrow down than I thought it would be. As I came up with, I thought, a few songs. I could probably come up with, a few songs that are really obvious. And then the list started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I'm only going to mention a few. And the few that I came up with, I decided to talk about songs pre-Revolver. Because Revolver itself, the whole album, you could argue, was the, a watershed moment, a real game changer and a change in direction. So I thought, what about before that? What are some indicators? So just some examples. Beatles for Sale, I think, had some moments on there that were some indicators of where they were going. And one of them is I'm a Loser. This is something, Dylan is starting to creep into their work at this point, and it was a very different kind of viewpoint that John was giving, and it was more introspective. And this is something that, of course, he would continue, throughout the rest of his career with the Beatles and the solo years. But this is the, really early indicator of it. Definitely not lyrics that you would think of in a typical pop song, Also, the acoustic element of it certainly foreshadows Rubber Soul. And so I remember hearing that song for the first time, when I first started getting into the Beatles and thinking, wow, this doesn't sound like anything they had done up until that point. Another, on Help, I think this is an important song that we take for granted, which is Yesterday. Now, we're so used to hearing that. We've heard most covered song in history. We're so used to it that I don't think we always think about just how revolutionary that song was at the time. And, of course, the first time they incorporated strings, that this is something that they would further explore. But this was the first time. I also think this was a turning point in certainly Paul McCartney's songwriting, but certainly a turning point for the Beatles in general. I mean, this was mature. This was mature songwriting. This was very introspective and kind of had a multi-generational appeal. I mean, I would think, and maybe you guys can, tell me, parents who would have maybe previously dismissed them as just another rock and roll act, how could you deny Yesterday? I mean, how could you deny the power of that and the sophistication of that, So I think that was a turning point. And then Rubber Soul had a lot of turning points. This was really hard to narrow down. Norwegian Wood with the sitar, that was a huge, and the lyrics. I mean, this was poetry, and abstract. I mean, this wasn't I Want to Hold Your Hand, for sure.
No.
Hey, watch it.
Not when he burns down the house.
In terms of theme. No, not in terms of that, but I mean, it was, what I mean is in terms of theme and sound,
Sure.
And same thing with Nowhere Man. I think that was also, I mean, the lyrics of that song are just something completely different. I love how they turn the lyrics, as they're talking about Nowhere Man, and then when John sings Isn't He a Bit Like You and Me? I mean, now they're turning it back toward the audience, but it's a more philosophical kind of thing. And finally, and I write about this in songs we were singing, which was The Word. This was what really a preview of not only the Summer of Love, as far as I'm concerned, but a preview of what they would explore. The psychedelia on Sgt. Pepper, on Magical Mystery Tour, of course on All You Need Is Love. I mean, the most obvious one. But this is now they're talking about love in a different sense. They're now moving a bit beyond the romantic songs, and they're talking about love as something different. And I just remember the first time hearing that song thinking, boy, you can hear them turning, they're changing as you hear this song. They're changing in theme, they're changing in sound, and it's the perfect preview of what was to come. So those are just a few of the songs that I chose. It's for thematic reasons, for sound, for instrumentation, that I feel were indicators of where they were, what was to come, and sort of as they were moving away from what I call Beatles 1.0, the earlier years. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys think, and particularly you first generation fans in this group. What your reactions were when you first heard these songs.
Well, something, kid, they have such an advantage over you and me.
Yeah, I know.
Because they got to hear it as it was coming out and chronologically.
That's right.
You got to realize it's a different experience for other people who may not have heard the music in that order.
Exactly.
You could have started out. Some people probably started out with Sgt. Pepper, or Abbey Road or something. So they hear the music in a different way.
That's right.
And those who grew up hearing all the changes.
Yeah, we have the more historical perspective.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's hear from Al on this one.
Okay. Well, actually, for my first selection, I go back actually even farther than Kit did. And now this is kind of 2020 hindsight because this was really before the Beatles even hit America. And that would be She Loves You. Which was it was the record that kind of broke the format, you might say, because their first three singles, as I call it, the 20 minutes that they were a boy band, the first three singles were all guitar, harmonica, relatively simple. She Loves You, first of all, dispensed with the harmonica and had a much bigger sound to it. I mean, it comes, even today when you play it, it comes roaring out of the speakers. And much in the way that I Want to Hold Your Hand did, as a matter of fact. So that was definitely a game changer, if you will. The second one, Kit mentioned it before, and that's I'm a Loser. Exactly what Kit was saying, that it was the first song on which John showed the influence of Bob Dylan. And I remember specifically seeing the Beatles perform I'm a Loser on Shindig in October of 1964. So this is a couple of months before Beatles 65 / Beatles for Sale even came out. And it was very different from what you normally would kind of associate as being Beatles music, even that early on. So I'm a Loser certainly has to be on there. The third one comes actually from the same side, the same LP side from which Yesterday came on the at least the British Help album, although it was on Beatles 65, and that's Tell Me What You See. Because that song, both instrumentally and harmonically, and in terms of the vocal arrangement, again, it was very different from what we had come to kind of associate as Beatles music. And it really kind of pointed the way toward the musical changes that they were beginning to go through. This was Beatles 65 was one of those crazy quilt collections of all kinds of singles and unused LP tracks and things, but there were a couple of actually three new quote unquote new songs on there, and the only one that wasn't a cover of those three songs, there were the two Larry Williams covers. The only original of them, actually the two originals, one was George Harrison's You Like Me Too Much, and the other one was Tell Me What You See. But Tell Me What You See definitely kind of pointed the way toward a new direction in their music. Number 4 is obviously, I mean, we talked a lot about it on actually, I guess it was last week, was Strawberry Fields Forever. Because let's face it, that it was the first song they recorded for what became the sessions that eventually produced Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and it was just a huge departure, in every way you can think of. As I said, we talked about this last week, so I don't want to be too redundant, but it's definitely a game changer. No question about it. And the fifth one, and this is kind of with 2020 hindsight, we didn't really think of it as being sort of a musical turning point or a game changer when it came out. But While My Guitar Gently Weeps, because that song really shows the arrival of George Harrison as really a songwriting peer to Lennon and McCartney, and also it kind of looks toward also his solo career in that he's his sort of guitar partner on the track is Eric Clapton, which of course had not happened before on a Beatles record. That an outside, there had been outside musicians, but not using the normal Beatle instrumentation, of guitar, bass, and drums. Eric Clapton was the second guitarist on that track, and so that kind of, to me at least, kind of points the way toward George's solo career. So those are 5 game changers, however you want to put it.
Well, I have a few questions to ask you based on your choices there.
Okay.
First of all, with regard to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, you said that was the first time that you recognized George as being, kind of an equal peer?
No, that's not what I said. No, what I said was that is, and again, this is 2020 hindsight. It's the song where now we realize that's where George really became, even though he had been doing fine work up to then, but that's the song that really kind of made him a peer to Lennon McCartney as a songwriter, and that and frankly, it may have had something to do with how unenthusiastic they were about the amount of new material that he kept bringing to the sessions, specifically the Get Back sessions. That they felt that obviously they felt threatened by it.
Sure.
Sure. But I think that While My Guitar Gently Weeps is the song that kind of really kind of cements George's role as a songwriter in the group.
Huh. Do you think that at that time the world was seeing things that way too?
No.
Because if you go back, I mean, I love all the early stuff that George did that he wrote as well. But once you're getting into Revolver, and he wrote Taxman.
Yeah.
I mean, a song like that, you would have to stand back and say, wow. I mean, look at the jump right there. Right?
Oh yeah.
What he's writing. I would have hoped that maybe first generation fans growing up would have noticed that. And I love the stuff before that too. But
sure. So did I. Yeah. I mean, You Like Me Too Much, I Need You are among my favorite songs from the earlier Beatles period. But we certainly admired his output, but we weren't really thinking in terms of, well, he's on the same level as Lennon and McCartney.
Okay. I mean, If I Needed Someone got attention, and the Beatles performed it live too.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And the only thing I would question is, Tell Me What You See. I know that you brought up that song in a previous show, but I don't know if I hear everything that you hear in that song. I love the song, don't get me wrong. And I love the melody.
Now, being Alan would probably could probably be more expert at explaining it, but just harmonically, it's very unusual for that period of the Beatles' development. It's and also even the instrumental backing, with the harmonium, that really had not been. I think there may have been 1 or 2 songs. Yes, it is, where they had used the harmonium, but it always struck me, certainly at the time, and it's always struck me as being a little different from what they were turning out at that particular point in their development as songwriters and as performers.
Did you want to add something to that, Alan? What Al just said?
No, I think he basically got it. Nothing more I can add about it, really.
Right. Okay. Steve, how about your thoughts?
I did it a little differently. Instead of just musical game changers, I combined events and music, so I have a little of both. The first one would be the meetings of John and Paul, and then the admission of Ringo into the group. It's hard to separate those two things. The John and Paul meeting is now looked upon as one of the most historic meetings in music history, and from who knew from that that was there in that little church that day that that was going to turn into what it did. And then letting Ringo in it, I don't think a lot of people really grabbed the significance of that until Mark Lewison wrote it out in his book. And so I think that the two of them together, I mean, those were the John and Paul obviously was the game changer that made the Beatles happen, but Ringo was the one that really pushed them forward. I mean, they've said that. They've all said that. So that would be the first. The second would be Meet the Beatles, which I mean, there's a lot of moments musically, and I went back over several moments in those days, musical moments, but Meet the Beatles because of the impact it had on culture. I mean, I remember it being everywhere. You couldn't get away from seeing that picture, that cover picture and the back picture, and just seeing the albums everywhere. Certainly none of the groups, none of the acts today that have any kind of impact had had that kind of impact, or would have had that kind of impact in 1964. The Beatles were pioneers in that kind of thing. So, and then from there, the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, I can remember sitting down and watching it, and hearing the commotion in the room. We were divided in our family. My sister and I were both very excited. My parents not so. My father especially not so. And it took him until the Rolling Stones to get really, to where he appreciated who the Beatles were, which was kind of interesting. But and in fact, I think I've mentioned this before, but as far as seeing the Beatles as a group, he got closer to them than the rest of us did, because he was an appliance repairman, and he was driving in Boston, and he said he came home one day and he said, all of a sudden this police motorcade comes by and I had to pull over, and he said, guess who was in the motorcade? And we all yelled at him. We go, no. Because we didn't get to go. They didn't let us go see them, but he got closer to them than we did. So anyway, the next one would be Sgt. Pepper, because of it was the blossoming of the studio that started with Rubber Soul and Revolver, and then went even further with Abbey Road. So I mean, but Sgt. Pepper was the album that if there's one album where you can indicate the genius of what they did, that's got to be the album right there. With all not only with the music, but the not banding the songs and having them run into each other, printing the lyrics on the back, the things that were included inside the album, the cutouts, which were, that was all revolutionary back then. I remember pulling the cutouts out and just kind of looking at them and saying, I'm never touching these, never going to cut them up. And I never did. Never did. And then finally, the last game changer would have to be the McCartney album, because of the fact that it was the end. As much as a lot of us did not appreciate that, and I still remember hearing the news report on the radio where the reporter was almost gleeful in saying, the Beatles are breaking up, and I was going, what? But obviously the McCartney album was a game changer. They went forward as four individuals from that point on, and so therefore, and there you go.
Okay.
Any thoughts?
Not much to argue about there. I mean, they're all worthy turning points.
I think, Steve, you made a great point when you talked about the Sgt. Pepper album about the lyrics being printed. That was definitely an important, milestone in Beatles, and also in kind of in rock in general. I mean, this was something that's inviting you to consider that these weren't just words. I mean, this was something to be taken seriously. This was art. And just like the whole album was inviting you to do that. But yeah, just that seemingly simple act of printing the lyrics on there, I think that's a very good point. That is another kind of game changer for them and for rock music in general.
And it was, and they also, I mean, there were concept albums in those days. One I can think of just off the top of my head that I never really liked it back then, but it was Pretty Things, SF Sorrow.
Yep.
But the Beatles really did a much better job, in my opinion. I like I said, I never really liked the Pretty Things at all, but I mean, Sgt. Pepper was a great album in every respect. So.
But didn't you feel that the albums before Sgt. Pepper were great too?
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't demeaning them at all. I was just saying that Sgt. Pepper stood out for what it was and what it did. And I mean, like I said, I remember taking that home and just kind of looking at it and being stunned by what they had done, because I mean, really. I don't know. I don't know how you felt, Al, but I mean, it was when you were looking at the new Beatle albums as they were coming along, they were doing things that nobody expected. That even those of us that were with them from the beginning were going, huh?
Yeah.
And even disc jockeys, and I've told the story of hearing Dan Ingram on WABC say that he didn't understand what Strawberry Fields was all about, and he wasn't alone. I mean, they were traveling on a road that not too many people were traveling on, and so yeah. I
mean, I'm sure we'll be talking much more about this as we get closer to June.
Yeah,
but the release of Sgt. Pepper was an absolute event. And it's one of those deals where, I mean, a lot of us can remember exactly, a lot of us can remember a lot of things from the 60s where we know exactly where we were and what we were doing. But I'm sure most of us can remember exactly where we were and what we were doing when we first laid eyes on that album cover and perhaps, put it on the turntable.
Let me ask a question. Did you guys hear the mono or the stereo first?
Mono.
Yeah, same here. And Ken, you too?
I'm not sure.
I know.
As a little kid, I don't remember what it was. Probably
yeah.
mono.
Yeah, I'm guessing mono.
Because I didn't hear the stereo for many years after. I would say at least 10 years. My first was because all we had was one of those big record. It was a Sears record player. And
probably not 10 years, Steve. 10 years means you didn't hear Sgt. Pepper in stereo till around the time the Hollywood Bowl album came out.
Yeah.
Maybe
very positive. I mean,
you think it's possible? Maybe
no,
5.
It might have been a little. You're right.
Probably a couple of years later.
But I mean, I didn't have a stereo record player for a long time, so yeah. But it was many years later. It was several years later when I first heard Sgt. Pepper in stereo. And it was great, by the way, when the mono box came out, hearing it again in mono.
Yes,
absolutely.
Because it was like going back in time again.
Yeah.
So.
Although for totally sentimental reasons, I still have my original mono copy of Sgt. Pepper.
Nice.
I'm not sure if I do or not, but I know I have a mono vinyl somewhere, but I don't know if it's the original one.
I'll bet you that my first copy was stereo. and I wouldn't have known the difference because I was 8 years old then, and I had a very cheap record player where the speakers were very close to each other,
Oh,
so it wouldn't have made any difference
Sure.
anyway. So that's what we had to deal with in those days.
I mean, by a certain point, only stereo was available, you know.
Yes.
So, and
Right.
it wasn't
That's a
much
good-
after Pepper, really. You know, by 69,
69,
70, it was
yeah.
hard to find mono albums.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, well.
Alan, I'm eager to hear yours.
Okay. You know, I was convinced as I was thinking about this during the week, and I'm even more convinced having heard what all of you have to say, that absolutely everything the Beatles did was a game changer. I mean, in terms of, you know, what Kit said about us listening to them as they were coming out, I mean, it was always different. You never knew what to expect.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Lady Madonna, everything. You know, when the new single came out, it was not like the old single. So, and the new album, the same thing. And you know, we just sort of took for granted that things should be that different. And they weren't also like what everybody else was doing apart from what they had been doing. It was just always something new. But to focus on, you know, 5 or so of them, the first one would be sort of wisdom of hindsight, because it wasn't something I heard when it came out, which was Please Please Me. You know, we didn't really get that yet. But to me, it's a game changer because there is a huge leap in both songwriting and sound and production between that and its predecessor, Love Me Do, and the few earlier Lennon-McCartney things that had come out, and even the non-Lennon-McCartney things that, you know, were on, that they had done up until then. I mean, on the first album, Please Please Me really leaps out. I mean, I Saw Her Standing There does too, but it's more of a conventional rocker. But Please Please Me, the vocal harmonies, the harmonica, which, as you pointed out, they dropped, you know, pretty quickly.
Yes.
But, you know, I mean, there was just something about that sound was just so incredible, and it was so energetic, and it's like 2 minutes long, and a lot happens in it, and so that's the first one. Second one, I guess, would be, you know, again, something I picked up on later because we didn't quite get it at the time, but the British Hard Day's Night album, their first album of all originals. And all really great originals. So, you know, for us, what we heard, you know, the film songs, and we heard some other stuff that, you know, had gotten on to, well, from the EP, from Won't Tell Sally EP that came out on Beatles' second album, and stuff on Something New. We got that album kind of piecemeal. But when you look at the British album, I mean, it is just an incredible leap, you know, from With the Beatles, which was great, or Meet the Beatles, which was great, to Hard Day's Night, all their own stuff, and such a great variety of stuff too. I mean, things we said today, you know, I mean, just song by song, it's just there are no second drawer things. Not that there were many second drawer things throughout the whole recording career, but you know, so that's one. I was going to pick Norwegian Wood because of the use of the sitar, which, you know, led to other things for them for the next couple of years. But Kit picked that one. So I'll just simply endorse Kit's and move on to Tomorrow Never Knows, which is the first track they recorded for Revolver. And, you know, you got tape loops, you got all kinds of foreign sounds, let's say foreign in the sense that they're not just the Beatles playing their guitars, bass, and drums forwards. You know, it kind of, in a way, even though Revolver has all kinds of stuff on it, some of which may have been a little bit older, like, you know, Here, There, and Everywhere, and is basically in the older song format than Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, and it all holds together brilliantly. Tomorrow Never Knows was kind of the leap for me, you know, compositionally. And from there, I would move on to the very first track they recorded for the White Album, which was Revolution. And I would include all three Revolutions because, you know, you don't get a Beatles trilogy of songs like you do here. And what you have here is, you know, John's first version of it, the single version, which was done sort of at the insistence of the others because he wanted Revolution 1 to be the single, and they felt that a sort of acoustic slow single wasn't quite the order of the day. And so it's not really as if he conceived it as a trilogy that develops from the, you know, slow, maybe we'll have a revolution, to the faster, now it's kind of, you know, electricity and energy in the air, to the absolute chaos of Revolution number 9. But however it worked out that way. And what you have now is a 3-panel picture of Revolution kind of building up slowly and then just being chaotic and terrifying. And so you, in addition, have, you know, the Beatles making a political comment, and making a political comment that isn't necessarily in step with what everybody was talking about at the time, with the more radical end of it. I mean, they're saying revolution, well, you know, but think about what you want. You want violence, you want destruction, you know, count me out. But obviously they wanted something. I mean, they had been talking about it. They had already been talking about their disapproval or dislike of the war, and they talked about civil rights. They did all kinds of things. They knew that something had to change, but they were just saying, think about how you want the change to happen. And the picture that they draw on Revolution number 9, which is, you know, built upon the outtake from Revolution number 1, is, you know, really, you know, everybody doesn't like that track, but I've said a million times already, it's one of my favorite things because it's so, I think it's brilliant as a piece of musique concrète, as a piece of electronic music. It's, you know, it's incredible, and it paints a really specific, really vivid picture that's part of that trilogy. So how many am I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if you count Norwegian Wood. So my last one would be Get Back. Get Back was a game changer in a way, simply because they were going to do the opposite of what they had done so far. You know, which was they had grown over the years more and more complicated and complex, and using the studio in a more and more sophisticated way. And with Get Back, the song, and Get Back, the album that it was supposed to be, the idea was, let's just go to where we used to be, except that they're not the band that they used to be. They weren't going to be playing I Saw Her Standing There. They were going to be playing new stuff and somewhat more complicated stuff. And Get Back itself was, you know, was an incredible song, very refreshing. I remember when it came out, it just was like, okay, you know, we kind of are sitting there thinking we want more Sgt. Pepper or White Album, but this is pretty rollicking, and it's, you know, a lot of fun. I mean, we didn't know yet the sort of semi-disaster that the Get Back, Let It Be sessions would become, and how it would sit on the shelf for, you know, so long until after Abbey Road and all that stuff. The track just sounded like the Beatles are up there having a great time. And the return to simplicity was, you know, that was a game changer at the moment, it seemed to me. So those were mine.
But in a way, couldn't you say that the White Album was a back to basics? And that was before Get Back.
Well, Back to Basics, it's got Revolution number 9 on it. It's got orchestrated stuff on it. It's got all kinds of things. It's got, you know, some of it is true. Back to Basics. I mean, Your Blues is back to basics, and back
still,
to the USSR.
Most of the White Album is guitars, pianos, and drums.
A lot of it.
You do have some, yeah.
You have Goodnight. You have, you know, Mother Nature's Son even has some other things. You know, it's not as complex in the way they had been as Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. There's a lot of things that are several songs that are just acoustic guitar, one acoustic guitar. But Yeah, but there was still all kinds of variety, and it wasn't the band sitting there playing live, no overdubs, that kind of thing, which was the ideal for Get Back. Remember, Get Back came out, and the ad was Get Back, the Beatles as nature intended.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so that was kind of a message. So,
Yeah.
In fact,
plus we were promised.
Alan,
we
could I
were-
ask you a kind of a what if question?
Yeah.
Suppose they had not had those 2 weeks or whatever of those rehearsals at Twickenham. If if Magic Alex had actually done his job correctly and the Apple Studio had been actually ready to go right at the beginning of January and they had gone straight in there, do you think the whole project would have been, would the vibe have been better?
Well, I don't think the studio was the issue. I think that the concept of the project is we're going to do this thing where we're going to play these new songs live. We're going to have our rehearsals filmed so that we can have a documentary before the live show, which was going to be the culmination of the TV thing, which is why they were at Twickenham, or else they could have gone to Abbey Road.
Yeah.
And I think it was just that they didn't like Twickenham so much by the end of those 2 weeks, and plus George leaving and saying I'm not going back there, that going to the Apple Studio became a condition of his return, with which they all agreed. They just didn't know there wasn't really going to be a studio there. But they obviously were dead set on not going back to Abbey Road at that point. They wanted to record in their own space, even if that meant bringing in portable EMI equipment. But yeah, I think it would have been the same, because the concept was show us getting our new songs together and then show us playing them in concert. So yeah, it probably would have been similar. There were tensions, some of the tensions, and I think it would be interesting to get to volume 3 of Mark Lewison's book, because maybe he'll get to the bottom of this. But you see tensions between George and Paul about whether they should play live and all that stuff. And yet before the sessions began, shortly after the White Album, George Harrison gave an interview to, I think, the New Musical Express, saying, our next thing is we're going to put some stuff together. We're going to do a concert maybe at the Roundhouse. He seemed enthusiastic about it. Now, maybe he was just towing the company line, that they had talked about that and sort of agreed. And, if he was going to go out and talk publicly, it was going to be in positive terms. But it sounded from that interview as if he was into the idea of the Beatles getting together, doing a small concert of new stuff. So by the time they actually got working on it, he felt differently. Yeah. But we didn't know any of that stuff. We just heard Get Back come out as the first single, and that just seemed like it was going to be like the start of something new, something old and new,
Yes.
Yep.
Well, as far as my picks here, before I even talk about those, I just want to say my comment about the White Album. I do look at that as being a stark contrast from Sgt. Pepper and Revolver and Magical Mystery Tour, because most of those songs were just the band. And I know there are those exceptions like Goodnight where there's orchestration and and Revolution Number 9 and all that. But to me, when you're talking back to basics, I certainly think that the White Album was a big shift coming from Pepper and then Magical Mystery Tour. I do agree with your point there with the Get Back, Let It Be stuff about the no overdubbing part. That makes a big difference right there. But anyway, turning points, kind of like what everybody here said. I mean, you pretty much said a lot of what I would have said. I know that, Kit, you brought up I'm a Loser, but I've always pointed to the first 3 songs on Beatles for Sale as being so different and dark. No Reply.
No Reply was one of the runners-up.
No Reply, I'm a Loser, and Babies in Black are such a contrast to a lot of the Beatles' music prior to that. And lyrically, so many of the early songs are all about boy-girl relationships. I love you, you love me, you love him, I don't want you to love him. You know, it's fairly simple stuff, but their lyrics were getting much more complicated, and their relationships, especially, the John songs in particular, although there's some of Paul's, where the relationships go sour. You know, it's not going in the direction where you're expecting it to go. It's not all happy-go-lucky music here. And so you've got 3 songs in a row that are like that, with Babies in Black included. So I thought that was very different for its time. And also, No Reply, the more that I hear No Reply, I hear Roy Orbison in there. There's some running scared. There's some running scared in there or something. But I love that middle section. You know, the if I were you, I'd realize that that part. It's so separate from everything else from the song, and I love when they took that time to compose something that was separate from everything else. It wasn't just verse and chorus. It didn't just go the way, like most songs have a formula, and a lot of Beatles songs did not have formula to them. And I love those 3 songs back to back. I also think I Want to Hold Your Hand has got to be a turning point, not only because it was the first song I ever heard from them, but it still sounds so fresh and so different from all the other songs they had put out at that time. Although you could say that about other songs. She Loves You sounds different from the other songs the Beatles had put out at that time. But there's a level of sophistication that the Beatles were getting there, even early on. And one of my favorite shows that we ever did here was when we talked about With the Beatles, and how we all kind of thought that there was a big contrast between Please Please Me and With the Beatles as an album, in terms of instrumentation, in terms of song structure, lyrics. That's the beauty of studying the Beatles here, is seeing progression even early on. I don't know if you would call this a turning point, but I think ever since I read what Paul had said about There Is a Place, I think There Is a Place is very different for its time, because it's not necessarily talking about a relationship, although briefly he does, but it's about looking inward, and it's my mind, and there's no time when I'm alone, kind of foreshadowed Strawberry Fields Forever, although Strawberry Fields is far more complex a song.
It does, however, follow the Beach Boys' In My Room, which is quite similar.
Yeah. I thought of the same thing, Alan. Yeah, but I don't know if you call that a game changer, because if you're making a comparison between There's a Place and Strawberry Fields, there's 3 years difference there, more than that.
Yeah.
So and also I have to say, like Kit had said yesterday, which paved the way for Eleanor Rigby, all the classical stuff the Beatles were doing for No One, She's Leaving Home. There are certain songs that, and also because I think there have been classical arrangements of certain Beatles songs, you can hear how certain songs from the Beatles adapt themselves to a classical arrangement, like Martha, My Dear, I think has a Baroque feel to it. Piggies as well.
Yeah.
Those songs. So I think Yesterday kind of paved the way for that.
Yep.
It's only in recent years, while I've loved Revolver my whole life, that because it's gotten such, I hate to say newfound respect, but more respect now than it's ever been. Because I appreciate the Beatles and their eclecticism more than anything else. This was the album where they really branched out the most first. And Revolver made it, I guess, if I was younger now and I listened to the Beatles catalog now, going, from the beginning up through Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, I would think the transition from Revolver to Sgt. Pepper wouldn't seem so stark, because so much of what they did in Sgt. Pepper, they also did in Revolver in a similar way. Love You Too led to Within You Without You. Eleanor Rigby led to She's Leaving Home. Tomorrow Never Knows led to A Day in the Life and Mr. Kite and those songs. So the fact that they really branched out with Revolver, it led to being just as experimental and eclectic on Sgt. Pepper, and even more so on the White Album. So, That's how I feel about Revolver. Those are the main ones. Tomorrow Never Knows, as a little kid, I always thought it was just such a weird track.
Me too.
Years
What is
later,
this?
everybody's pointing to Tomorrow Never Knows as being a real game changer, and you could understand why. I mean, the last song on Revolver, it got you ready for Sgt. Pepper.
Yep.
And you could also say, in between for Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. But, yeah, Tomorrow Never Knows, you got to say is a game changer or a turning point. So those are, some of the ones that I wrote down. But
excuse me, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
See, Revolver, I'm not going to argue with you that Revolver did start, what it did and led into Pepper, but you don't think that they were really not completely settled on where they were going? My feeling is that they were, Revolver was kind of an experiment, and Pepper was the result of that experiment. Do you agree with that, or do you think that Revolver was the bigger move?
Well, the biggest move is going from Rubber Soul to Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a bigger move than Revolver to Sgt. Pepper.
Okay.
Because, if you look at Rubber Soul as being very folk, more simplistic in the arrangements, and here all of a sudden you look at Revolver and you've got all this psychedelic music, and the classical sounds of Eleanor Rigby and For No One and the Indian music. And, there's so much. Good Day Sunshine has got that, dance hall feel to it, which, led to When I'm 64, even though that was really an earlier song.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying that all those different styles of music the Beatles did in Revolver, they took to another level on Sgt. Pepper. But, I'm not saying Revolver is better. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's, when you consider the fact they did that before Pepper and they branched out the way they did, it's so stunning to think they went from Rubber Soul to Revolver for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I ended up deciding, for my 5 basic picks to exclude Revolver, because as I was going along and writing, jotting down songs, I was jotting down virtually every song off of Revolver. So I thought, okay, I think I need to go back a little further because, there were so many revolutionary moments on that album, but there were revolutionary moments before then.
Sure.
Obviously,
Yeah, but Revolver, definitely, because I can remember telling Candy Leonard when she interviewed me for Beatleness about playing Revolver for friends of mine after I had gotten it, and and they were like, "What is this? This doesn't sound like, this isn't the Beatles that I know."
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. And, they were, at that point, they were saying that they thought the Rascals were a better band than the Beatles, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I actually have a question for I hate to keep saying, let me ask you first generation, like
the old dinosaur.
I don't mean like your museum pieces or something like that. Don't
you do.
Get me wrong.
Yeah,
Okay?
you do.
I'm just asking because you guys have the experience and Ken and I don't. What was your reaction and the reaction of your peers when you heard Rain? What was that? Because that was such a departure too.
See, I don't know why, but I wasn't at the point like I am now where I'm analyzing everything so seriously.
Yeah.
In those days, the music was hitting you, and usually you'd hear it first on the radio.
Yes.
Because whoever, whatever station you were listening to, I think at that point I was still listening to WMEX in Boston. And one of the or WBZ, and one of the disc jockeys there, especially in Boston, and when we talked about radio stations and listening to the Beatles on the radio back in the day, the Boston stations had a habit of getting Beatle imports, and playing them.
Yeah.
I don't know. We talked about this before? Did WABC do that Al?
Oh yeah, it was like, as soon as, both WMCA and WABC, if they could get a hold of an import of a Beatles single that might have been released a week before, or especially the albums with some of the different tracks, they would absolutely put them on the air, and then almost immediately get a cease and desist order from Nat Weiss.
One of the New York stations got an advance copy of the White Album, and some of the versions were different.
It was WNEW.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
are you sure it was WNEW? I thought it was WABC because ABC.
Oh, was it ABC?
Yeah, it was ABC AM and FM, and it was the Peter Sellers tracks, that Ringo had sent him. Somehow they made their way to to certain radio stations, and because there were only about 6 or 8 tracks, and they sounded like they had been recorded over the telephone.
Yeah, I think there were 10. I actually have a tape of
maybe
that.
10.
They played the tape of that a few years ago on WABC Rewound, and I don't remember that it was the Peter Sellers stuff, but I'll take your word for it, Al. But I do they did play it, and I do remember hearing some of it and saying, and realizing that it wasn't the master tapes. It wasn't.
Because it was real low quality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But and that was probably maybe a month before the album came out, and I can remember in '65 somehow Gary Stevens at WMCA in New York got a copy, again, sounded like it was recorded over the telephone, of The Night Before. And this is in the middle of June of '65, so this is about 2 months before it actually came out here.
Wow.
It probably was recorded over the telephone.
It probably was.
Yeah, those were fun days when when disc jockeys used to do that stuff. I mean, but again, getting back to what I was saying, obviously with something like Strawberry Fields, you had to sit there and go, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah.
Because kids my age, and I'm trying to think, I think I was probably around 10 or 11. I mean, I was, I wasn't thinking serious Beatle music. I was enjoying it was them, and that's, I think, the way most of the younger fans were. I mean, they weren't.
Sure.
We were as confused as everybody else was. They were.
Rain took a little bit of getting used to. A few listens, but it was and certainly Paperback Writer was very accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. As a kid growing up, the one song I had a lot of difficulty with was actually 2. But I Am the Walrus, I couldn't understand at all as a little kid. And I got scared to death of hearing A Day in the Life. And thinking about a car crash,
It was kind of an eerie song, that's true.
Yeah.
And then you had the Paul is Dead stuff, which surfaced when I was in college. That didn't come out, that didn't come out back in '67. That was years after.
Right. 69.
69. Yep.
Well, I was just curious because this friend of mine that I mentioned earlier that I had the conversation with, I was talking to her about that, wonderful American Bandstand clip where they show the Strawberry Fields video. I just love it. And they were all saying, that's weird. They look weird. And what's with the hair and, all that stuff. And I remember asking her, what was it? She said it was sort of there became kind of a split with her and her friends that they seemed to know, okay, they're going in another direction. You're either with them or you're not. You either decided to say, all right, I'm going to see where they're going, and others said, to hell with this, I'm going with the Monkees. I mean, it was like kind of a turning point.
Dick Clark looked confused in that clip too. I mean, it was like he didn't get it. He didn't get it at all. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Most artists who had hit records had a formula. And they stuck to their formula, and the Beatles were constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And rapidly, year after year after year. It's part of what kept us fascinated with them. And for some people, it scared some of us.
Yeah. I don't remember being confused by any of these things, Rain or Strawberry Fields or any of the stuff on Pepper. I mean, it kind of was, I think, me and also all of my friends, we didn't have any splits of opinion about this. It was, what are the Beatles doing now? Okay, let's listen to it. Let's see what this is. It wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't like we worried about whether we liked it or not. It was almost as if you would take it for granted that you were going to like it. It was the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were kind of going along with the ride.
It was an event. It was an event because. I mean, you'd have the disc jockeys playing these things once an hour and then whispering over them.
Yeah.
Exclusive,
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing to keep to keep other stations from stealing them. But I mean, it was those. They weren't. I don't remember any stations doing that with anybody else's stuff.
No.
I mean, it was only the Beatles.
No, not even the Stones.
Not even the Stones. Not not at all. So interesting.
But yet, you were talking about Candy Leonard. She made it a point to say that there were a lot of fans who, when Revolver came out, they didn't get it. It was too big a change. Yeah, and they would have rather have turned. That was the perfect timing for the Monkees.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the Monkees were playing more of what the Beatles were doing in '65.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if you didn't want to change with the Beatles, if you wanted something similar, go with the Monkees.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, of course, the Monkees patterned themselves enough after the Beatles to make that decision fairly easy. Although although a lot of people went for the Monkees, not all Beatle fans did. I mean, there were still Beatle fans that stuck with the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh yeah, I think it was mostly the younger fans who who really weren't really kind of musically ready for Tomorrow Never Knows or Love You Too.
Right.
Who felt their kind of their comfort zone was more in the area of the Monkees or Herman's Hermits, etc.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time here. So this has been a fascinating conversation, talking about game changers and turning points for the Beatles. And why don't we just go around and let everyone know how our listeners can get in touch with us? Steve, we'll start with you.
You can email me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I have a personal Facebook page, and I also have a Beatles news group called Beatles News and Commentary, where we talk about where I post some of the stuff that I write, and also we talk about other things too. So join in. Everybody's welcome to join, and see you there.
Okay, Al.
Facebook, Al Sussman. Twitter, at ASUSS49, and through Beatle Fan Magazine, www.beatlefan.com.
All right. And how about you, Alan?
Okay, the easiest way to get me directly is on Facebook, either under Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remix. And Steve usually mentions the email address for the group, which is thingswesaidtoday.radioshow@gmail.com. I answer some of those. We all do. And you can follow us on Twitter with the @ Things We Said Fab. And we have a Facebook page, Things We Said Today, Beatles Radio Fans. I think Steve may have mentioned that one.
No, I did. Actually, I didn't, but
no?
I was going to. But thank you.
Anytime.
Kit, how about you?
Well, you can reach me on Twitter at Kit O'Toole, one word. I am also on Facebook. You can find me there under Kit O'Toole. And I have a website. You can go to kitotoole.com to find out what I'm up to.
Yeah, and also we should mention, since I don't know if you'll be on before then, but you will be a guest at the Fest for Beatle Fans.
I most
coming
certainly
up.
Yep.
The first weekend in March. And Kit and I are going to be doing a panel together on the Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So come, shoot by and say hello to us. We'd love to talk to all of you. Also, I would like to mention that as far as getting in contact with me, Ken Michaels, my email address is everylittlething@att.net. You can also friend me on Facebook under the name Ken Michaels. And I just want to mention a couple of things on my website because the last few weeks we've been talking about the Weaklings. And I just saw them in concert, by the way, at Daryl's house. They put on a terrific show there, and they rocked. I mean, this is such a tight band, playing songs from their first two albums, the originals, and a lot of Beatles, and sometimes really cutting loose on the Beatles stuff. I mean, I Want You, She's So Heavy was a real highlight for me because they were jamming on that song. Hey Bulldog was fantastic, Helter Skelter, whole bunch of great stuff. And by the way, I just noticed on Facebook that Glenn Burtnick from the Weaklings said that since they were recording that show for a live album, by the way, they had cameras there, and there was a live feed on Facebook, and they had 21,000 people tuning in.
Wow.
To see the Weaklings at Daryl's place. But it was a tremendous show, and I'm actually giving away a pair of tickets for another Weakling show, and this is at the Cutting Room. And it will be on a date that we're all familiar with, February 9th. Something might have happened on that date. I don't know. But if you want to win a pair of tickets to see the Weaklings at the Cutting Room on February 9th, go to the ticket giveaways page on my website. Also, I have a new book to give away on my Beatles trivia and games page. And I think I heard about it first from Steve. It's called Lennon on Lennon. Conversations with John Lennon, and it's by Jeff Berger, and it's a book of transcriptions of interviews that John gave, many of which have never been published before.
Oh, wow.
So you could win that on my Beatles Trivia and Games page, as well as Kit's fine book, Songs You Were Singing. So just go to my website at kenmichaelsradio.com for that.
And if I could just interrupt for a second, you were mentioning the Weaklings. I'm really not supposed to say this, but at the fest, they're actually on Sunday afternoon. We're actually going to have a press conference with the Weaklings.
Oh, nice!
In the discussion room.
Is this for a big announcement of some kind?
No, just a general, press conference, because it was something that actually we did some years ago with the Ruddles.
Oh, wow.
Except for Dirk. Dirk wasn't there, but the other Ruddles were all there. But all four Weaklings will be there.
Cool.
And so we're going to have an actual press conference.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I have one piece of news that's kind of half related to the Beatles, only because it involves it has a connection to a former Ringo All-Star. I'm reading here on Facebook that Pete Overend Watts of Mott the Hoople, who of course would have played with Ian Hunter, has passed, which is the original bassist for Mott the Hoople. So,
okay, sad to hear right there.
Anyway.
All right, so that puts this show to a close. This has been a blast. And thank you, Kit, for joining us. And we welcome you back anytime.
Absolutely. Anytime.
And for Things We Said Today, this has been Ken Michaels for Al Sussman and Steve Marinucci and Alan Kozin and Kit O'Toole. We just want to say thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.